Hello. So update for today is Department of Education, the scaling problem, or is it a problem, and Genesis puns, along with pyramids. So the first question, Department of Education, that's probably the biggest news of the past few days is Trump is getting rid of the Department of Education. Um, the question that I would have is that does the Department of Education do what it's intended to do? We understand the intent that you want to improve education. Okay, good intent. Does it accomplish that? I do think it's pretty obvious to most people that the education system has issues. Um, Democrats have been bashing Republicans over the head with it for the past, I don't know, as long as I've been alive. That our education system is terrible. Okay, if it's so terrible, why do you want to keep the institution that manages that around? And you will say, okay, well, it makes it better and everything, but does it? Here's what I know about teachers: the good teachers teach. The people who tend to go into the research or psychology side of teaching tend to be the teachers that aren't as good at teaching and they don't actually know what they're talking about. There's a lot of pop psychology in teaching. There is so much. Talk to any education major in college. They are not. They are not smart people. Do you know how you learn? I'm a smart guy. You memorize first, and then you turn memorization tools into a system. And then once you have the system, you can better memorize future things. It's a rope. So you memorize, you learn the system behind the memorizing, then you get back to the memorizing, and it kind of cycles upwards, upwards and so forth. The whole new math stuff, that was all the education intellectuals who don't know what they're talking about. The whole structure of language is good, but in the grammarian way that they did in the old days, not the new bullshit. Understand everything at once and say no. You understand parts, and you put the parts into the whole, and then the whole go into the parts. That's how people actually learn. A lot of this stuff that's promulgated by the education industry is basically just bad pop psychology. It's not even good pop psychology that actually teaches you something that makes you happier. No, it's bad pop psychology. So that's what the Department of Education produces. Now they also do stuff like loan payments and like giving student loans and stuff, which by the way is one of the reasons why the expense of universities and college has skyrocketed over the past 40 years is because of all these loans basically making easy money into the academia industry that basically gets rid of the price pressure to not spend so much money. Now, there are ways you can spend a lot of money. You can spend money efficiently in education. That's not where most of these loans are going to. So I wouldn't be okay with giving a lot more loans to community colleges. Community colleges are fantastic. Um, I was in community college for about 6 months when I was switching careers from chemical engineering to computer science. Really, really good experience, to be honest. Teachers cared, they taught pretty well, um, and it got me to a good baseline to take university classes. So that was pretty good. And so there are ways to spend money effectively in education, but the Department of Education is not it. Mostly what they seem to be doing is basically stopping private schools, stopping homeschooling, and the ability to educate your kid is a pretty fundamental right. Like you create life, you have the right then to educate it, as long as you're not being abusive or anything, in the worldview you want. The idea that you have the ability to force other people's kids to adopt your ideology is complete bullshit, and should be is not is what the Department of Education basically promulgates. Finally, it's a left wing institution. All of them are, it's a bunch of left wingers in the Department of Education. I don't like my money going to support people I who hate me. That's reasonable, right? Um, Now some of the stuff I do believe in testing to a certain extent. You can't get better at something unless you measure it in general. But again, you don't. I actually think that might be a good use of the Department of Education. But given how partisan the education environment has become, because talk to any teacher, they're all a bunch of loonies. I think it makes sense given the Department of Education, what individual states figure out what education system works better for them. And by the way, with AI and everything, it might not be academic knowledge that we need to teach kids. We might need more shop classes. We might need more hands-on stuff. You can't automate a carpenter. You can't automate a plumber really easily. You can't automate an electrician. All of this stuff that's being automated, the easiest stuff to automate is the intellectual stuff, like the stuff I'm good at, unfortunately. Writing, reading, you can do that with an AI just fine. Analysis, even programming, all of the white collar jobs are easier to automate than the blue collar jobs. So why do we have an education system that forces everybody to become academics of a sort? Now, yes, you'd want to have some base knowledge, and I guess that's what high school is for, to some extent. But we're not getting to that base knowledge stage. We teach all kinds of nonsense about like ideology and whatever. We're not teaching the basics. So yeah, you need to have a baseline, but the Department of Education is not getting us there. And I'm sympathetic to the argument that if we had the right people in the Department of Education, we could fix things, but we don't, and they're not being promoted into that spot. They're just not. So yeah, starting from scratch makes sense. Or starting from states. Plus, different states have different economies. Like the Texan economy requires different workers than the Massachusetts economy. And the Massachusetts economy is a lot of PhD jobs, that kind of thing. Okay, but they also have a pretty good education system. States like Texas or North Carolina or whatever have more manufacturing, so they should be focused more on that. That's not rocket science. And the idea that like, oh, well, we just get out with the intellectual jobs, that's actually kind of bigoted against other countries. They can do intellectual jobs just as well as we can. There's no rule that says we get the higher order jobs. There's no rule for that. Plus, most people don't have high-end jobs. And if you're sticking a bunch of the high-end kids with all of the rest of the kids, you're not creating more of the high-end academic people you need. You're dragging a lot of them down, giving them mental health issues. So that's my thoughts on getting rid of the Department of Education. Good move. But we do need to improve education, and it'd be nice to have some kind of pressure to do that. Just Department of Education is not it. So the next thing I want to talk about is the scaling problem. So you may have noticed on the internet, there's many people talking about civilizational collapse based on falling birth rates, basically. There's a lot of talk around it. Some of it is focused specifically on birth rates. A lot of it is around the ecosystem, the whole romantic ecosystem of the world, dating markets, red pill, whatever left-wing feminists have to equivocate to the red pill. Sure, they have similar communities of some sort. All that kind of stuff. Nobody getting married. And I have started to wonder whether the answer is just it's a scaling problem. You see, in a complex system, sometimes attributes of the system happen in big scales that don't happen in small scales. So you see this in tech where you can have an application that's pretty good. It's like a single web application if you just have a single instance of an application. But if you have it across the entire world, you run into different problems. For example, you have spikes of usage for RAM usage that might be a lot higher than a single EC instance can do. So different problems pop up at a really big scale. You see this in cells, basically. If you get to a big enough cell, there's a size limit on how big a cell can be. Is at a certain size, the surface area of the cell is not enough to feed the inside of the cell because the surface of the cell is a squared and the volume of the cell is a cubed. There's a size limit on how big a cell can be. There's this kind of thing pops up a decent amount in different fields in different ways. I think humanity might be have a scaling problem. You see, humanity evolved to have at most 2,000 people in a town. This is a complete guess, but it's my guess. But there's a size limit on how big the communities are that you can really handle. And there's probably a lower end to that too. And so what happens is that I think humans breed in a particular size environment. So different problems that pop up when you have a big enough environment, or issues like hypergamy, trust issues between men and women that pop up more and more. If you want to see an example of that, see the Andrew Tate effect. So somebody like Andrew Tate in a village would be murdered by the village if he was around 200 years ago. Sleeping with too many people, you are disrupting the environment, making it bad for everybody. You die, depending on the community you're in. Or the whole OnlyFans thing, same type of thing. So there's a lot of situations where it's a big enough environment that allows psychopathic behavior to work because nobody ever calls you out on your bullshit. Other examples too, but basically the illusion of choice. If you have too many choices, makes it more difficult to be happy with the choice that you make, so on and so forth. So you also see that some small communities are doing a lot better. Minority religious communities do a lot better than the overall public in maintaining marriage rates, basically. So you see the example of Jews do very well for their income level. There's Mormons are another example. Muslims to some extent are an example. There's different examples of this where if a community is cohesive and sticks to itself, it actually has a higher fertility rate and higher marriage rate. So my theory is that that's why those groups are doing better, because they have a smaller actual community. They might be in the general community of America, whatever, but they're in a smaller community in real life. And that's also what you get. That's why America does pretty well. America has a lot of these random small communities. Some of them we recognize, like Jews and Mormons or whatever, but some of them we don't. Like the random evangelical groups, like the Protestant church. I go to the Bible study, where they're their own cohesive thing within the general Maryland society. And that's why America is actually doing pretty well, at least 0.2 better than England. And also the vocalness of the communities we have. So you got a country like Japan doing really badly with that area, but that's because it's all one big community. So it's too big. I think that's the theory I'm going with. So I was talking about this with my best friend, and I'm like, well, we need to big government's a problem, big capitalism is a problem, big companies and such. What is with anyway? And I'm thinking everything's too big. And she's like, well, if I was in a small community, I'd be burned as a witch. Because she, like me, never really fit into groups. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So we had an argument about that. But I was thinking, it's like, yeah, we have the same premise that we don't fit in. And yet we come to different conclusions. My conclusion is modern society sucks. Go back to tradition. Her answer is that humanity sucks, and that just keep the current ship going as far as it can, even though it's not sustainable. I think, which actually makes sense. But the question is, who's more likely to burn people at the stake, atheists or religious people? And I think the answer is atheists. At least over the past century, that's been shown. So I don't know. It's a tough question. Like, if you're not somebody who fits in, would you fit in better with a small group or a big group? And also, you have to look at how eccentric people were treated now versus back then. I think eccentric people fit in better, weirdly, with a conservative region. Meanwhile, I don't know. It's a complicated question, but I am still in favor of the scaling being the issue, which also means that all this stuff is a self-solving problem as soon as the population plummets enough. And the other question is, do you want people to be more connected or less connected? I think having people more connected basically introduces them to an internet community that's vast, and that does the same thing. That's why you have poorer and poorer communities being affected by the malaise of modernity, because they're joining. They might be in a poor environment, but they are joining a big community that's too big for their britches, for anybody's britches, to be honest. Anyway, the only thing I want to talk about is pyramids and Genesis. So it's amazing. There was this discovery, basically. There's pyramids. There's 6 huge, like 6 football fields or whatever, deep columns that are underneath the pyramids. So I talked to both my best friend and my dad about it, and they're like, oh, it's a base for the concrete. It's like, yeah, that's probably it. But it's so fucking impressive, right? And so it's amazing that people were a lot more advanced back then than we give them credit for. And you see the Genesis too, like the amount of puns. So apparently Adam is the name of Genesis's first man. And the word for mud is Adambon or something like that. And so Adam was made from mud. So mud was made from mud. It's like it's poetic, you know? It's very, very clever. There's all these cleverness bits in the Bible that people miss. Like the atheists are like, oh, there's no God. And then the Buddhist people are like, every word is true. And I'm like, that is a great pun. And that's what the issue that both sides suck. No, not suck. I like the Buddhist side, but I like the atheist side too. It's just like enjoy the puns, enjoy it as a work of art because that's what it is. Now, it might be a work of art by God. I think it is, but it's still a work of art, right? You can analyze content. It's good content. But they're a lot more advanced than we think. And I'm kind of wondering whether the scaling problem has popped up before. If you have a big enough community, things fall apart. And you see it with Rome, with Greece, with probably ancient Egypt. Every society that's falling apart, it might just be a scaling problem. You get to a big certain size and then you fall apart. And the reason why we didn't fall apart earlier in our iteration of the cycle is that I think individual freedom and individual groups, and we had a lot more quirkiness of groups in our society that basically let it grow bigger without falling apart. So all the stuff people complained about, like, oh, Catholics only marrying Catholics, or Protestants only marrying Protestants, or Jewish people only marrying Jewish people. Our modern sensibility is like, oh, that's terrible. People should be able to love who they love. Yeah, it's a protection against scaling. So if you only marry the other 2 Catholics in the community, that dodges the scaling issue, or the 100 Catholics in the community, that dodges the scaling issue. Meanwhile, if everybody can marry everybody or date everybody, you end up with scaling a lot faster. So in Western societies, people were divided a lot more by geography, by town, by nation. And when people did that, they were divided into smaller groups. So you might be a peasant and you might know the other people in the castle. Or you might be an aristocrat and you only marry other aristocrats. So there's all these different social technologies designed to reduce the size of the community you're in. And you'll notice that fertility dropped below 2.1 around the time of mass communities. So depending on the society, it's anywhere from 1950 to 1980, I think, guessing. But when you get to a certain size of community, things fall apart from a fertility perspective and other perspectives too. And so there's all these social technologies designed to divide people because when people are divided, they are in smaller communities that actually are self-sustaining from a people standpoint. That's the theory I'm going with because it kind of there's people like pointing 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 issues, 20, 30 issues. I think they all go down to the same one issue, which is size. It's too big. Community. It's too. There's a crude joke I make here. I mean, I think you're guessing it now. But that's the theory I'm going with. So I think my best friend is wrong. I don't think she's wrong. I think she doesn't understand the diversity of communities that are out there, that were out there. And she thinks that she would be treated the same way in every community that she was in. And I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of communities would appreciate somebody who's feminine and nice and knows how to cook and knows all these different things, has interesting knowledge and everything. Like, she's awesome. I don't think conservative communities would hate that person. Now, these other people, like some people, they're nuts. Maybe not. I mean, that's just my opinion. But yeah, I should probably organize this into an essay, to be honest. I think I have enough here to think about. And I'd be able to draw from history and have all these different examples. This might be my first hour-long video. I'll do some notes. This is obviously a disorganized format for talking about stuff. But I think I have enough here to have a theory, actually. And this is actually my theory. It's not from anybody else. So I might actually develop this. I might be wrong, but it's going to be developed to be wrong. Anyway, cheers.